3:30, so we'll get started. I want to welcome everybody to OHASTA Tuesday. We have an exciting webinar planned and two amazing facilitators. But just to give you some background, OHASTA, if you haven't heard of us before, we are a volunteer organization of history and social science teachers in elementary, for elementary and secondary schools. We've been around since 1978, and we do want to take this time just to thank OTF for the Zoom platform that we're using today. I am in Crystal Beach near Fort Erie, so I just want to take this moment just to do a land acknowledgement, and I want to begin this webinar by acknowledging the land on which I am from today, and it's the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. The territory that I am on is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. And today, where I am from, is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, and acknowledging this reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of the Indigenous people. OHASTA has also been committed to working with, providing, collaborating on ways in which we can ensure that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, especially number 62 and 63, are in our classrooms on a consistent and regular basis. So, I don't know if you've ever used Zoom before, but there's a few features. So we just ask that you stay muted, unless, of course, the time arises like we're in breakout rooms and things like that, or you have a question to unmute yourself. You can choose whether or not to have your video on or off. That's up to you. There is a chat feature in which if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat feature, and then I can bring them to Rachel and Jim's attention when there's some breaks. And we're also going to use the poll feature in breakout rooms, but when we get there, I'll let you know about those two items. And why you are all here today. So today we're going to be talking about what were they thinking, looking at the CHY 4U e-learning course with Jim, the lead reviewer, and Rachel, who are going to talk about the process building inquiry-based online activities, which is extremely relevant to us today and right now in our practice of remote learning. Just to give you a little sense of who they are, Rachel Collishaw is the president of OHASTA, and she's a lead reviewer on the CHY 4U e-learning course. She's a teacher and an instructional coach with the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board. She's currently on secondment to Elections Canada, where she gets to talk about elections and democracy with teachers across Canada. How fun is that? And Jim Pedrech is the lead author on the CHY 4U e-learning course and the website manager for OHASTA, and built our beautiful website if you haven't seen it yet. He's a department head in the London Catholic District School Board. His numerous projects involve, among other things, video games and interactive online museums in which his students are full participants. Jim's led projects both local and global to engage both students and teachers in history and technology. So how lucky is everyone here today? So I am going to turn it over to them to get started.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. I forgot who was going to speak first, so I'll just go ahead. Thank you to Sarah Murdoch, who is the secretary for OHASTA, for facilitating and moderating and running the tech on this webinar today. And welcome to everybody here. So Sarah, we're going to make you work. So you're going to set up the first poll. So if you can move to the next slide. We just want to do a quick poll to see why you're here, and kind of get a sense of who's here. So pretty even spread on the I have taught, teaching right now, in the future, coach, consultant, or other. Many times, once or twice, no, never. Great. Okay, so that really helps us know like sort of where we're pitching, which is kind of all over the place, which is great. So Sarah, if you want to move to the next slide, I'm going to talk for a couple minutes about e-learning in Ontario. So So for those of you who are not in Ontario, which I know is at least one, Ontario Ministry of Education has set up a distance learning site during the COVID-19 pandemic, and all of the content, or not all of, a bunch of the content from the courses is on that site. And I think Sarah is going to put put those links in the chat. And then the main place where, as a Ontario school board based teacher, that you're going to find this is in your virtual learning environment. So, oh, I think I didn't update this link. So there's a couple of different ways to get there, but usually you go through your school board's portal. And in the virtual learning environment, that's where it's an entire classroom. You've got your portfolio that students can keep track of their work. You've got drop boxes. You've got all of the features. Your students usually get preloaded into there. So it's basically like your classroom in a digital sense. Whereas the Ontario Ministry of Education is sort of, you can get a sense of the course and you can see most of the content, but there's no links to any of the assessments, and all of that stuff is kind of missing from there. It's just sort of more informational, whereas the real course is actually very interactive. So that's just kind of the note. So if you're from outside Ontario or you're not in a school board, you won't have access to the full course, but you can go and look at it on the Ontario Ministry Distance Learning site during the breakout rooms. So next slide, Jim is I'm gonna hand it over to Jim to talk about our approach to writing. And I see Lori Hazard is on the chat today, so she's the puppeteer.
She's the master of all things. Hi everyone, I'm Jim. Nice to see everyone here. This, I think, have been my 4th or 5th time working on a team like this, and I can tell you that it does require a significant committed team. Besides the people who are actually on the writing team, the reviewing team, the number of people working in the background on the technology, making the courses look good and function well, and then Lori Hazard bringing it all together. It really does require a complete team approach, and I hope to show you in the next slide or two how that played out. You can see our team on the left side there. When we first met in Toronto to embark on this project, we decided to take, almost throw everything out of the window, everything we had done before. And if you think about it, it's kind of rare that you have that experience as a teacher where you get to start something completely fresh and say, okay, let's forget about everything else we've done and figure out what we need to do in this environment with what we have in front of us. And we started framing all our work around guiding questions, and you'll see that in each unit, in each activity, and even in the summative task at the end of the course, all built around those questions. And we also thought to ourselves that since the curriculum had changed from Western world to the world, that this was an opportunity for us to provide a resource to teachers that was broader in scope. So we started with the premise that, okay, if you're a history teacher in Ontario at the high school level, you've probably taught the World Wars once or twice. So do you need more content about the World War specifically, right? And if you've taught CHY 4U, you have probably spent a fair amount of time talking about revolutions, specifically the French Revolution. So we decided to touch on those, but leave them for the most part off to the side and provide resources that would really represent the entire world, right? And with that regard, we decided to try and imagine the best possible course we could, and we had less than a year to do that. It was an incredible time crunch, but I think we've put together something that I hope you will find useful. So can we go to the next slide if we don't mind? Thank you so much, Rachel. I think this one's back to you.
Yep, back to me. So so you can see this is what the course looks like when you go into the graphic interface, and you can see each of the 5 units. So unit 5 is the culminating unit, and embedded in it is the student's response to the course question, which is how do we get here? So that course question really drives what they do in that final task. So unit 5 is one of the ones that you're not going to see on that Learn at Home website, because it is basically just one activity around the final culminating activity, which is really students responding to that question. But you'll also notice that in each of the other units, there's a strong essential question. And so we really used Wiggins and McTighe and their definition of essential question. Sarah, I did put a link if people are interested to go check that out. They've got sort of 7 qualities of an essential question. And one of the ones that really I think is important in understanding how we came up with these questions is that they recur, not just over this course, but over your lifetime. So when I first started using this course question, how do we get here? I had about 6 more words in it, and I used it with my class, and they were like, no, miss, it's too long. We're never going to remember it. You have to put, like, the question has to be, how do we get here? And I'm like, that's like, are you sure you want to answer that question? It's pretty big. But over the course of each unit, the students break the questions down, and then they build up towards those unit tasks and activities that you can assess. So so that's how we did it. And just a quick note, shout out to Jim here, because it was his idea to use different maps from each era to be sort of the foundational image for each unit. And I think it's really beautiful and kind of shows that dramatic change over the last 500 years or so. Okay, I think we can move on to the next slide, Sarah. Yeah, so we're going to spend the next sort of 15 minutes telling you some examples from the course of things that we really liked and maybe some stories from behind the scenes. If you want to move to the next slide, Sarah, I can tell you sort of our goals for the content of this course. So we really wanted, like the curriculum, it needed to have an inquiry focus. So we really wanted to embed inquiry learning into every activity and not just be sort of information regurgitation. Historical thinking concepts are a big part of that, so you'll see the historical thinking concepts in every activity multiple times in lots of different ways, and we'll share some examples. Really engaging assessment tasks, things that are going to be much more interesting than just completing a worksheet or just writing an essay, so things that students can hook into and get excited about. We also were thinking, because we're all, of course, classroom teachers, we wanted to make it adaptable to the face-to-face classroom. So if you're going to use this online, you can also use it in your face-to-face classroom or in your blended classroom. And I'm going to explain a little bit about blending after we get to the end of our examples. We also, and that's part of that, is having a lot of room for collaboration. So where you might have students working in small groups on something, you can do that in the online classroom, in the face-to-face classroom, and lots of room for kids to work together, whether they're online or in person. Rich primary source content. I don't know, Jim, if you did the math, but we got thousands of primary source documents, excerpts, images, maps, like you name it. There's tons of stuff in here. It's just so rich, and it's really all wrapped up in really nice questions. As Jim said at the beginning, the global perspectives was really important to us. He had a huge spreadsheet of like keeping track of like which continents and countries we had done, so we weren't like favoring one country or another as much as possible, and following the sources that were available as well. And so bearing in mind that this was written in 2016, we were really trying to address Indigenous histories and colonization in really respectful ways. I'm going to say since 2016, I've learned an awful lot, and looking back at the course, I'm like, oh, I need to put more in here, but I'm not writing it right now. And of course, that project was put on hold in 2018. So in terms of updating the curriculum, et cetera. So we did try to address these things. I'm not going to say that we were always super successful, but it was there. So Jim, back to you.
Thank you so much. I just want to point out too, I just noticed Diane's on the call. Diane,
oh, Diane.
To you. She was one of our writer reviewers, and she was also the lead writer on the CHC 2D online course, which is spectacular. So
thank you.
Go, Diane.
Yay. Hi.
So what I want to show you over the next couple of slides are just some segments of our course that that I felt worked really well, and I had a chance to use in my own classrooms. One of the first things we did, actually I think it's the second activity, is we wanted to have students situated in 1450 in a way that would make sense to them. So we created 7 or 8 infographics, each one representing a major city in the world. Seoul, Constantinople, Venice, Seville, Tenochtitlan, cities from all around the world. And we wanted to give the students a map that would show them where these cities are, so they get a sense of a global sense of the space, but also introduce them to guiding questions. You can see a few questions on there as well, and also primary sources. So from the onset, we wanted to create this activity that would introduce the students to the concept of primary sources, but also help them understand how different cities were developing. And the guiding question for this, and I love this question, was which city was on the rise? And so what I actually did in my own classroom is I printed these maps off on glossy paper so that they could have them in front of them as well. And if you want those copies, I've got them somewhere, and just send me an email. I'll definitely send you the original files. And had the students actually examine the maps and the primary sources in detail. And then each group had to make their own argument about which city they actually felt was on the rise. And what was interesting is some of the cities that you would expect to be on the rise weren't. Tenochtitlan at this point was only a few years away from the Spanish conquest, but at this point that hadn't happened yet. And the city of Edo, modern day Tokyo, in the early 1500s was essentially a fishing village. And so helping the students understand how some things were predictable based on the evidence, but some things were not, I think was a really great exercise. And I'm quite fond of that one. Can we go to the next slide, please? This activity worked really, really well in class. This is a variation on the application of the great man theory. We created a set of criteria, basically shape the times, product of the time, and agency, meaning how much power did that particular figure have to shape his or her times. And then we presented 7 to 8 historical figures from around the world and provided some context, as you see here, for the students to actually make their argument. And the discussions we had about what agency means in a given historical context were really, really rich. And actually, I use the very same format to the format I just mentioned a few moments ago, where groups of students in my class chose one figure, graded that figure on the scale we created, and it provided the rationale, and they had to listen to each other, and we would have a class vote afterwards. And it was interesting how one year we had someone who would fit maybe the traditional application of great man theory, but the other years we did not. And so it's interesting how the students read that criteria quite differently than maybe we had anticipated. So that activity works really well. Can we take a look at the next slide, please? One of my favorite parts of the course is the use of a wide range of primary sources, often juxtaposed with each other and often visual as well. So one of the things we were really stressing, especially in Unit 1, was the interactions between various cultures. And so in the actual activity, when students would click on these images, the images would flip over and they would provide some context about those objects. And so the object on the left is a Portuguese cross, but also is partially representing Congolese culture. So it's a representation of the interaction of those two cultures. And the image on the right is one of my favorites because it's a Moroccan diplomat who may have been the inspiration for Shakespeare's Othello. And so seeing how different cultures were interacting through objects or through images like this and primary sources like this was, I think, one of the most satisfying elements of the course. Can we take a look at the next slide, please? So one of the things we found ourselves doing is, through the Minds On exercise at the beginning of each activity, was trying to make a really current connection that would provide context for the students for that guiding question or that guiding inquiry. The image on the right, I don't know how well you can see that, but it's one of my favorite images of all time. And it started with this very simple premise where Macaulay Culkin, former Home Alone star, he saw a picture of Ryan Gosling wearing one of his image on his t-shirt. So Macaulay Culkin had that image placed on his own t-shirt, and then it became this cycle where they kept taking this first image and placing on a t-shirt and taking a picture of themselves. And so what's interesting there is it's very much emblematic of celebrity culture, right? But celebrity culture hasn't started in the 20th century. It started actually much earlier. And so what we would try and do is use images like that, modern connections, to introduce concepts like celebrity culture in other activities. And our hope was that providing that context would help students engage and see how this isn't an isolated thing from the past. It's actually an example of continuity and change. Yeah. Rachel, I think the next couple are yours, right?
Yep, that's right. Yeah, thanks. And Jim worked really hard making those minds on like super relevant. Every activity has like a really interesting current day topic to introduce it. So I'm going to talk about this activity. So this is in Unit 3. This is isms and ologies, and this was one of the activities that I used in my, well, I used something like it in my class, but when we had all those amazing writers in the room, like we just, we could just make it really meaty. So isms and ologies. So this is looking at sort of 19th century isms and ologies, and for each one, so you get liberalism, nationalism, feminism, communism, romanticism, and you get a video, and then there's like 6 figures to choose from. So right here, what you're seeing on the screen is sort of below that video in the introduction, and here's 6 figures that you can choose from, and these are the ones for feminism. And so this is a really nice example of that global perspective. So the 6 people here, so the first one is Kamini Roy, who is a Bengali poet and feminist. We have Elizabeth Cady Stanton, the American, Charles Fourier, the French philosopher who coined the word, Sojourner Truth, also an American abolitionist, women's rights activist, Mary Wollstonecraft, who's British, and then Q Jin, who's Chinese revolutionary feminist and writer. So already we're having like, even though these are just images, and there's a little link to where we got them from on Wikipedia, but basically students are supposed to find a couple of sources from these people about one of these women. So they only have to choose one. They don't have to look at 6 different figures for all the 6 different isms. They're really just picking one. So it's not overwhelming. And they're going to find 2 sources that establish a connection between that one figure and the ism itself. So and then choose an historical thinking concept that best fits the role of the figure. So the organizer is really trying to get students thinking about that person and really expanding some of those. And then, so that's just sort of the prep work, and then students come back and then enter into a discussion around historical significance. So which of these isms overall was the most important, so that they're entering into a discussion. So obviously this activity can really easily be adapted to an online classroom, to a face-to-face, or done in the online, as well as expanded to include all kinds of other figures. So I see we're missing figures from the African continent in this particular one, absolutely. But yeah, like you get a beginning for you. Thank you, Diane. So the next one, so this slide has an animation, so don't click yet, Sarah. No, go back to the slide. Yeah, so this is in the Opium War. So this is actually from one of my favorite activities, which is where students construct a more fair World's Fair. So they really look at that idea of the World's Fair, which emerged in sort of the imperialist ideas of the 19th century. And like we've continued doing them until like well into the 21st century. But what are they, where do they come from? And how is imperialism shaping the world and globalization and colonization? So this is just one document set around the Opium War, and it's around historical perspective taking. So we're looking at how did different people in these 3 countries, China, Britain, and Japan, see the Opium War. So so Sarah, you can click the next button, and it should just pull up the little list if I've done it right. Yes. Okay. So yeah. So when students click on each of those images, they'll see these different sources, and with little explanations or hover buttons for questions. So there's at least one of these in every activity. This is where the primary sources sit. So they're all kind of wrapped up in these nice learning learning objects. Sarah, let's move to the next slide. So this is the opening for Unit 4. So this is Unit 4 Activity 1, and this is getting students to think about that unit question, are we any better? So like I said, those questions aren't really window dressing. They're actually driving the assessment tasks for that unit. So students explore, they brainstorm, they're going to enter into a discussion online, obviously in person if you're in person, and then use the tracking sheet through the unit to build their understanding of what do we mean by better and who is we, and really breaking down that question and building it back up again. And so Unit 4, and I think this was Diane's idea, I'm not sure, but Unit 4 is thematic. So there's 4 different activities, so cooperation, conflict, migration, consequences of industrialization, globalization, and decolonization and terrorism. And so they can be done in any kind of order. Students kind of have a bit more choice over that, or teachers can, you can construct it how you want, but each one kind of looks at a bunch of different issues in the 20th century, and not really, focusing a lot on World War I and II, like Jim said, like, we know that in Ontario we cover those pretty well in grade 10. The last slide that I have here, just to share an example also from Unit 4, is an interactive learning object. So this one we had, all of these different information pieces. So each one of those boxes represents a fair amount of text, some images, some primary sources, above this, and this is sort of what the students are going to do with that. So they're going to consider each of those articles that we wrote and then decide whether that demonstrates decline or progress. So really trying to visualize the thinking, and then students can take a screenshot of that and enter into a discussion around it in the online space. And this also highlights that we're really not trying to cover everything. We're trying to provide lots of examples and case studies, and show how, because obviously we're not going to be able to cover in a semester 500 years of world history, like it's impossible, but we are trying to provide a bit of a snapshot. Okay, so next slide. I'm just going to have a quick word about blended learning and how that's different from e-learning or face-to-face learning, or what we're doing now in this emergency distance learning, right? So, so if you just move to the next slide, Sarah. I love this. It was a video that was shared with me through a professional development with one of my colleagues in my school board, who's an amazing teacher. So I just took those 4 hallmarks and really wanted to explain and how they could work with this course. So, so blended learning is when you take the online and you move it into the face-to-face, and you take the face-to-face and you move it into the online. So that's what that seamless connection between online and offline works. So maybe you have students participate in an online discussion, and then you bring that into the or vice versa. So you can do the activity online and then bring that into a face-to-face discussion, or the opposite, right? So there's this connection between the two. The increased collaboration and control over time, pace, path, and place of learning. It's like a tongue twister. So the example I just gave about Unit 4, where the activities are thematic and can be done in any order. So when you have that kind of blended learning, and you could say like, okay, well, maybe this one part of the class is going to become an expert on this topic, or maybe everybody's going to do a couple, or you're going to do them in whatever order you like, or that kind of thing. So once you have all that in the online classroom, you have places where people can have asynchronous discussions and build on their learning. The virtual classroom presence. So this is really key. The virtual learning environment, as Brightspace now or D2L, is not the same thing as a Google Classroom. so the VLE is more like it's your classroom, and like the stuff that you put in it is like the furniture. So Google Classroom like will definitely manage the flow in and out, but the virtual learning environment allows students to have threaded discussions. They allow students to hand things in, to do a whole bunch more things than what you just get with Google Classroom. And then, of course, the big benefit of doing blended learning is that repurposed time. So, you know, there's maybe fewer lectures. You can maybe have students reading more primary sources, working more effectively in groups to decode the text. You can have more space for conversations. There's lots of different ways of doing it. Sarah, if you want to move to the next slide, and I'll just give it a little plug for. Jan Haskins Winter and I are going to be doing a webinar through OTF called Just Blend It in June 11th. So if you want to learn more about blending, feel free to come to that webinar. And we're going to condense 3 days of learning into an hour. So that'll be great. Yeah, so that's what blending is. And so one great example of way of blending is by having the blended groups. So if you have like some kids that are working in an online and some groups are working in a face-to-face or maybe with the teacher, so you can kind of have students rotating through different kind of areas, both online and offline in your face-to-face classroom. Okay, so breakout groups. Jim, you're gonna introduce.
Yes, I am. Okay, so first of all, can we have that link shared for that slide? The slide that's up right now for the Google Docs. So what's going to happen in a moment or two is we're going to give you a chance to dig into the course, and you are going to be randomly assigned into a breakout group. And we've got a doc that is going to be shared with you in a second that actually, you know what, let me just
I can do it, Jim.
You got it? Okay, you want to do that?
Yeah,
so, and you're going to have that link shared in the Zoom chat. And so whatever breakout group you're in, let's say you're in group number 8, then when you look at the breakout groups, you're responsible. We'd like you to take a look at whatever corresponds to that number. So number 8 on the sheet happens to be Unit 3, Activity 4. So your group is actually going to take a look, there we are, at that activity, okay? So can we flip back briefly to the questions, and maybe everyone else, if you could just click on that link that's in the group chat, just so you have it open and you know where you're going to go. There are a few questions, a few things we'd like you to do when you're in these groups. First of all, we'd like you to introduce yourselves to each other and get to know each other a little bit. I got to admit, of all the video chats I've been on the last little bit, this is actually my favorite part, where you get to talk to a smaller group of people and interact a little bit. So we do want you to get to know each other a little bit. We'd like you to look through your assigned activity. You can screen share if you wish. And there are 3 basic questions we'd like you to take a look at. What do you like? What can you use? And what questions do you have? Questions about perspectives, our goal, things that you think might complement those, what's already there in some way. And if you could designate one person to take notes on that Google Doc in the appropriate part of the table, just so we have those. And then after about 10 minutes, I think, is it, Rachel?
I think we were going to say 10 to 15. We'll check in after 10. 10
or 15. We'll bring back together, and we need you to designate one person who may share the thoughts from your group. Okay.
Right here.
Yeah. So thanks for coming back, everybody, and thanks for all your comments in the Google Doc. You might have noticed at the top of the Google Doc there was also a link to this document. So this was a document, as the lead reviewer, I had to put together at the end of the course that says, like, what are all of the things that are in the learning in this course. So learning objects, videos, podcasts, primary sources, assessment tasks, everything. So this is like several pages long. And one of the things that I was just showing in my breakout room was that you can search for it for like particular countries or places or people or sources, or you can just, you know, browse by unit. But it's it's pretty wild, like how much stuff is in here. It's super rich, and so I hope you all take advantage of that. Thanks, Sarah. I have not had a chance to look at the at what you guys wrote, but
Here we are.
Jim, were you going to do this part? I forget.
Yeah, and I certainly can. I think I'm just aware of our time. So
Oh yeah,
it's
We're coming
4:30 now. So I was thinking maybe that at most maybe each group would just give us one takeaway. Does that sound
Sure.
about right, Rachel?
That sounds perfect. One very quick takeaway. Yeah, I was going to do this. That's right.
All good. We're on the fly. So whoever was the rep for group number 1, looking at cities of the world, if you can share just one idea that stuck with you, that would be great.
I liked there were 2 of us, we liked the activity around Constantinople where they have to practice the mastery, right? They get all these examples, okay, now it's your turn.
Yeah, I love that too. That was such a great idea.
Awesome. Did we have someone from group 2?
Maybe they were just chatting.
Maybe, and there's nothing wrong with that. We did
Totally
we did a lot of
fine.
that. I'm just going to blame Lori Hazard for my group's chatting. But that's
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You were with Lori. Wow.
Yeah, it was quite nice actually, and Sarah was there too. It was great. How about for group 3, looking at art, ideas, people in 4 regions? Give us one idea or one question you have, anything that stuck with you.
Hi.
Hi.
It's Diane.
Hey, Diane.
Okay.
Oh, baby.
Hey,
Hi.
baby. Okay, so I feel like we looked at the one from the province, and I feel like they cut things out. Am I?
Yeah. No,
okay.
They totally did. They cut out all the assessment.
Okay.
All of those things. Yeah.
Okay, so I feel like that one was here. It was modeling how to analyze a primary source. I let Martin Luther, and then you have to do it on your own with 4 subtopics.
Yes.
So I think we missed that part, but some of the things people liked in it were that there were different approaches to the study through a video element, an actual primary source, and different ways of presenting the same kind of source or same kind of event. And then the modeling part of it as well. I think that's where Jim has a video of him breaking down the primary source.
Yeah, I love that one.
Yeah, so it's really transparent and explicit, and that kind of academic self-talk, which I think is important to model to kids.
Thanks, Diane.
Thank you. Welcome. Can we scroll down a little bit so we can see next group? Group 4, you're looking at consequences of industrialization, globalization.
Yeah, that was actually, I was in that group, but Laura, maybe you want to speak to one thing?
Okay, sure. We really like the interactivity of it all, whether it be the videos or the sheets. So there's lots of info, but really interactive. And the world tracking sheet was my favorite. Very simple, yet very rich and deep at the same time. Love that.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Laura.
Thank you. So group 5, you had a choice. It looks like, lots of notes there. So innovation and origins of industrialization and cooperation and conflict. Can we get the rep for that group just to share a couple thoughts?
Yes, no, it was great, great inquiry questions that really help guide students and be able to sort of apply it to their own lives. One of the questions that we were asking about was the guiding questions at the beginning. Are students supposed to set up their own Google Docs to answer those questions? And then that is sort of what gets submitted back to the teacher?
Let me take a look.
Yeah, so, and thanks for that, Robin. One of the difficulties, again, has already been mentioned, is that because the province, the ministry kind of took out the, some of the assessment elements, it's in some cases not particularly clear what students need to do in the version you were looking at. So, and honestly, it's been a little while, so I can't remember. So Rachel will do a quick check. Rachel,
I'm looking.
Okay. So how about Rachel, you do that, and I'll move on to the next group and maybe circle back whenever you get an answer to that. Rachel, is that cool?
Yeah, can you just tell me, Robin, inquiry questions Like, are you talking about the unit question or questions within the Minds On?
Yes, well, at the very beginning, there's guiding questions, and then like what this whole unit's going to talk about,
Right.
and then so students, like it seems like they laid it out nicely where they talk about bringing up the ideas, like brainstorming, and then you start to collect information, but there's nothing really to sort of send back to the teacher of what the student learned.
Yeah, no, there's like a discussion, there's like several discussions, there's a bunch of other things, and a submit your work and a save to your e-portfolio. So those are the things that were stripped out in that ministry site. So if you look at it in your VLE portal through your school board, then you'll be able to see those.
Okay. Yeah. And that's a great point. And if there's one thing I can say, and I don't know if Jan's on our call as well, there's no way Jan would ever let a course get by her, get through her purview unless we made sure that stuff is there.
Yeah.
And I'm glad she was around to make sure we did that, because it is really important to have those connections, right?
Yeah.
Group number 6, you were looking at intended and unintended consequences of economic and cultural exchanges.
Hi, I'll do it because Chris is just busy doing stuff. So yeah, we were questioning at first, like, would kids born after the year 2000 know who Macaulay Culkin is? So just kind of like, obviously it's written kind of in the explanation of the activity that he's in Home Alone, but I think seeing him as an adult, they wouldn't get it. So I think you'd have to kind of contextualize that a little bit more. Mm-hmm. So we said that even though they might not know who Macaulay Culkin is, you can still use the example of like British propaganda, like on China. So like even today, like the kids would be familiar with the royal weddings. So it's kind of just changing up your examples of like looking at maybe examples of the royal wedding, China, and kind of giving that idea of the cult of celebrity. And then just kind of based on what you were saying, that the assessment or pieces have been pulled out by the government on this course, we found it was very kind of jittery going from that activity and then talking about the Enlightenment and absolutism. We're like, is there a connection? Like, why are you going from celebrity and then talking about absolutism? So we were both trying to figure that out. And then like we as teachers realized that it's a thematic connection of this interaction of people in the 18th century, but you're literally going from, you're bouncing around a lot in terms of time from like the 20th century to piracy to absolutism to the Enlightenment. So it was just, we thought that was just kind of, so maybe just tightening up how you present it if it's blended or on learning. That was just kind of our thoughts, and that's it.
And tons of good stuff there. I think it's something that we were talking about in our group is that with when you work from a textbook, the textbook feels like a finished thing. And one of the nice things about being in the online environment is that it never quite feels finished. It's always easy to change, right? So I completely get what you're saying about Macaulay Culkin, although the fact that kids don't know who he is makes me feel just a little bit older, but I'll live with it. That's my thing.
You are old, Jim.
That's all right. And I do. Yeah, right. But I got to admit, one of the things that I found difficult at times was trying to maintain a thematic approach, but also give students enough to latch onto. Yeah, so I can see that being, again, I wish you were looking at the full version, but I think I'm totally on the same page with you there. There are times where, in retrospect, maybe we would have done things a little bit differently. Yeah, in group number 7, you were looking at isms and ologies and migration. Whoever's got group number 7, you want to share 1 or 2 thoughts that you had?
Yeah, I'll jump in just really quick. My name's Tyler, and in our conversation, we were sharing of how this might not fit everyone's format for education. So we talked about the application of this within the classroom itself. And a couple of things that came to mind is we discussed doing a lot of seminars, and in those seminar styles to prepare these students for university to look at maybe more academic papers. A lot of the sources, obviously you're doing a ton of stuff, but looks at Wikipedia, trying to direct students in that direction, where we were thinking about potentially bringing it a little bit larger to have students explore, again, rigorous academic papers and this sort of to go through with those.
Yeah, interesting. I don't think we actually directed anyone to Wikipedia. We used sources from Wikipedia, especially images, because sometimes they were the most
stable.
For sure, totally understood.
Yeah, the primary sources, and I totally get what you're saying too about the importance of having that balance, right? And that's a discussion we had in a lot of different regards too, in terms of what sort of work, not only what sort of things should students learn and what sort of sources should they look at, but what sort of work they should produce themselves, right? Yeah, and I do think it's important for teachers to have the space to adapt it as you just described. I think that's,
yeah. And I think, you know, bearing in mind also that, you know, I go back to that, it's really a case study approach. So we're trying to provide some snapshots from a bunch of different places. We're not going to get everything. The world is going to change. And as a great teacher, you're gonna pull in those examples, and you're gonna pull in that stuff that your students need. I do feel like we did get into some historiography in a bunch of things, like in the example that Jim shared with the great man theory. But yeah, you know, reading academic papers, definitely not a huge strength of what we did, but we really did focus on that, engaging with primary sources, really to get those building blocks ready for understanding how those academic papers will get written.
For sure, and the critical thinking there is fantastic. These are just things that we discussed in our group,
Sure.
and how it might not fit for everyone, but little ways that potentially could get around it. No, awesome job, thank you.
Yeah.
And I should say too, and I wrote the thing, and there's still things I do differently. Right?
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah. And the other thing too is I should note too that if you have a chance to look at the full version with the assessment and evaluation piece connected in, that's where the research component comes in a lot more frequently. And so, you know, if you have a chance, take a look at that and see what you think. Sarah, I think you were going to talk for our group. Is that right?
Sure, I can do. Yep, I can do that. So our group had the experts on this course, and then me. But Laurie Hazard, who of course was the person who was engineering all of the development of these courses, said that the reason she really loved this course is because, well, she had lots of reasons, but it has very, very powerful primary sources that have been curated so well that even without the lessons around them, like they're almost standalone as learning objects that students can start with. So, you know, if you were a teacher right now looking for something to start your class with, like I am next week on this very topic, you can pull this collection of sources out and start there, and the students will probably be completely engaged. We talked about the fact that this course as well, it's a new way of thinking and teaching world history from an anti-oppression lens, and Jim brought up that students had asked him about, you know, are textbooks diverse enough? So is this course diverse enough? Which was the goal, right? To rethink world history from a different lens. But we sort of put the question out there, well, do we do a good enough job not following a victim narrative, right? So not focusing on the fact that genocide was done to a people, but giving agency to those people. And actually that's coming through in the activity that we looked at, the opportunity to have those conversations. So in just that one section, there's a lot of opportunity for teachers to explore some pretty heavy stuff with kids and some very good historical thinking.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, the timing couldn't have been more perfect in the sense that you're dealing with this very activity next week anyway, so that's great. It was perfect timing. And by the way, before I move on to, actually, could we flip forward to the next slide if we don't mind? Just because this is essentially where we wrap up our part of the discussion. We want to thank everyone for your comments as well. Can we go one slide further? So this is where you can find the two of us online, Twitter, and I think I've already shared my email there as well. I want to thank everyone for participating. I would also like whoever made the comment earlier about the representation for Africa at a certain activity. If you could contact me, I would love to know more about what you would like to add to that, because I think that'd be something I could really benefit from. Rachel, is there anything you want to say at this point?
No, but if you do have to leave before we're done? I think Sarah's, no, I'm good. I have too many thoughts. I'm so excited to be here and to talk about this again with everybody. And thank you for the lovely words, Cordco. Sorry, I'm mispronouncing your name. Yeah, no, we really tried to give a lot of choice, right? So you're not going to do everything in the course. You're going to pick and choose, and you're going to do some things, and the assessments are really rich. Thank you. So I think we should flip it over to Sarah, who can send us on our way. And we do have a survey that we'd like you to answer. So she'll give you the link for that as well and let you know about what's coming up.
Okay. Well, thank you both Rachel and Jim and everyone else who participated in our webinar. Just so you know, we have 2 that are coming up shortly. On June 2nd, we have kind of a chat, a happy hour about bridging grade 7 to 10 history. So if that's something that you're interested, kind of collaborating, talking with elementary and secondary teachers to see where those connections can be found and how we can strengthen them, that would be a great conversation for you. I'll put the link on where you can register to these webinars in the chat as well. And then on June 16th, we are going to look at the CIA and the CIE 3M e-learning courses, like kind of what we did today, with a writer, Jan Haskins Winner, and the lead reviewer, Zoe Flatman. So that will be another engaging webinar, and we hope that you join us for those 2. I also put a link to a survey in the chat. If you don't mind filling that out for us, that would be greatly appreciated. It'll help us plan for future webinars. You can also find us on our website, on Twitter, and on Facebook as well. So please stay connected. Yeah, and if anybody has any questions or comments and you want to put them in the chat, I'm sure Rachel and Jim would be happy to stick around for a bit and answer them.
Yeah, for sure.
We'll make
I've
sure
got
that
time if anybody wants to stick around and chat for another 15 minutes or so. Feel free to stick around. Otherwise, thanks for coming. We are going to post the recording as well on the OHASTA website.
Thanks to a certain pandemic, there's literally nowhere else for me to go, so I will be here anyway.
Yay, we get Jim.
Yeah.
So the course template, I'm not sure what you're asking. So Diana, can you ask your question again?
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, like, if I wanted to use this course or the way you've got it set up, like, where do I find it? Because I went on the D2L, it's just got Unit 1.
Okay. So my guess is that you so the preview for Unit 1 and D2L is just a preview. So what you probably need to do is contact whoever the TELC is for your board, assuming you're in Ontario, and just and have that course activated. I think that's slightly different in each board, but once you have that activated, you should see the whole course. I've also posted the link for you again to what the ministry has open to the public without the assessments. So at least you've got that to look at too.
Right. I just contact my IT department.
Well,
no, it's usually in like pedagogy and learning or whatever. What board are you in?
Oh, I'm with the Ottawa Catholic.
Oh, Ottawa Catholic. So Erin Doak can help you out with that.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Good
This is
to
really
know
great.
people.
Very informative. I'm excited to try this.
I think, is Erin here? She was here.
She was, yeah. So I'll email her and I'll get it started.
Okay, yeah, that's great. She can point you in the right direction.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Byron and Julian. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Anybody else have any other questions? Feel free to, you can raise your hand in the sidebar or just hang out and chat.
That's all good.
Or it's all good. We can. Hi, Lori.
I enjoyed myself.
Thank you. We unmute Lori so she can talk.
No, I was just going to say I'm leaving, but I loved it. Thank you very much. And I didn't know these were happening, so I'm just going to keep coming to all of them.
Oh, fantastic. Well, this was the first one that really involved your puppeteering skills. Yeah. So, yeah, we're very happy to have you here. Aren't you retired?
I am, yes.
But lovely.
I have been doing a few small projects for TILO and course development and stuff. So it's always good to find out what people are liking and not liking. So this has
Yeah.
been great. You could ask Sarah about that. We worked together this summer.
Sarah knows so much more. She's more than a pretty face.
Anyway, thank you for doing this and enjoy your pandemic time.
Okay, great.
Sorry
Thanks,
about that.
Lori.
See ya.
Bye.
Thank you, Lori.
So, see, we actually had a great question. How would you use this with a split CHY for you and 4C class?
Oh, carefully.
Yeah. So, I not having done that before, I'm not sure how to answer that question.
Yeah, honestly, like I think what I would be doing is looking at every activity individually and just like making selections. So I know like in D2L you can turn things off and turn things on, and I would like turn off some of the content if I could, and then basically do a lot of modeling, try and like the 4Cs, like honestly what they need is just a lot of literacy support. So use the things that we put in there. Like I was, as I was getting ready for this, I'm like, oh, there's the cue chart. Like, use the cue chart and like model how to do that and make little videos and that kind of thing to help them. Yeah, thanks, Julian. That's a great answer. Like, why am I answering this? I don't know. I haven't taught a 4C 4U class using this content.
My other inclination would be for the 4C to focus perhaps slightly more on the visual primary sources, as opposed to necessarily the ones that are a little bit more text heavy.
Yeah, and not require as much with the written either. Like try and have more conversational. Like I know that's what works with my students as much. One of the things that I was showing in my breakout room was how you can, like when you're in the discussion threads, that you can do a recording. So you can do either a video recording or an audio recording. So like making sure that students know that that's an option rather than having to type everything out, and just like making sure all of those accommodations are in place where they're needed. Yeah. And yeah, probably just reducing the number of things, right? Like, in that example I gave where they were like, these 6 ologies and you pick one person and you do like a little thing, like maybe just pick 3 ologies and then, or 2 or whatever's a reasonable amount of work, because usually it's the literacy that's the barrier, and you've got to, like just reduce the amount of reading and writing to demonstrate the understanding.
Yeah. Although I think the minds on, especially the modern connections, would be one thing I would definitely keep.
Oh yeah, for sure.
To have that context about this is still relevant now, or this is how this problem manifests itself today, right? And continuity and change and that sort of thing. Yeah. Oh, that's an interesting question. Anything else on everybody?
I do have a question. I'm currently a pre-service teacher and I'm not able to actually look at a full version of this course right now. Actually, I was Diane Botour's student teacher in February and March.
Lucky you!
The format of a lot of this is familiar. But my question is, what does the 30% summative for this course look like?
Oh, I can pull that up and share it. Maureen, I'm just going to answer Maureen's question because I think it's a bit quicker, which is basically, I think, yes, you should definitely learn more about D2L. As we were getting ready to come today, sorry, I think I did the sharing wrong. I'm going to stop again. I noticed that my school board was running a couple of online courses for how to do e-learning and how to do things in D2L. And I think it's totally worthwhile. It's a really powerful tool. And it's so worthwhile. So here's unit 5. So what you'll see, crumbs.
I'm trying to find it in the my own version here. Just give me 1 sec.
I think if I don't go through the graphic, there's a glitch on mine. It went through one time, but here we go. No. Okay. So here's unit 5. There's just a glitch in my computer with the graphic interface. So yeah, so we're really going back to this question and then saying, so we're gonna have a discussion, and we're gonna think about how the themes recurred, how it connects to the question, and you know, I think we spent some time in that first unit breaking this question down. How did we get here? But kind of revisiting it. So this basically gives them an option of like 4 different options. You know, for a C-level class, I would also give the kids an option of like an interview where we just have a conversation and they show me their stuff. But yeah, so an essay, an exhibit, a documentary, and an interactive narrative, which is kind of Jim's specialty, which is more like, you know, creating an interactive game. I've used Twine, and I don't know how to do things online like Jim does, but it's totally accessible to students in terms of making kind of a choose your own adventure almost kind of story.
Yeah. So our thinking was there, and I'm sure it differs school to school, but my experience at a small school where we have one section of this course a year is that the reason why students sign up for the course tends to be quite diverse. There are some students who actually want to study history. Some students really like history, but they'll probably be in a specialized program like a tech program the following year and not necessarily study history exclusively on its own. So we wanted to give students a wide variety of ways of demonstrating their learning. So the number of students I've had in my class who are going into production of some kind, so that we gave them that documentary option. Number of kids wanting to be in video game design. It made sense to us to give them that option, and then also give the students who are going to more traditional university style routes to have that essay as a foundation as well.
Yeah, and I had a student who right at the beginning of the semester, he's like, "Miss, I'm going to Ryerson for film. I know it already. Everything I need to do in this class needs to be a film." I'm like, "Cool, awesome! I'm so excited." So, you know, like he already knew where he was going, and like, you know, I made him write like one essay, but like he knew what he needed for the next part of his journey. And you know, yeah, my daughter's in art school right now, and if she'd had the option of doing an exhibit over an essay, like, oh my gosh, she would have been so excited. So, yeah. Okay, we got some more chats.
Yeah, Cordo, your question about the ability to monitor whether students have read, responded to feedback. Yeah, it is great for that. And actually, and I know Zoe's a big fan of one of the features too. I think she mentions that is the audio record feedback in D2L is kind of awesome. And I've been using a lot now. So anytime students write anything or submit any kind of task, I just hit record. It gives you 3 minutes, and you strength, weaknesses, next steps, all that stuff. And it's a really powerful way of providing feedback, because both you and the student have a record of it too, which is great.
Yeah.
Right.
But I was gonna say, like, even if you don't have access yet, like, because you're a student teacher, just like Lori said, access to just the primary source document sets, like on their own, it's huge. Like, and that's what, you know, now the public has access to through the Learn at Home site. So I think that's pretty great. Any other questions or things you want to chat about? I love that you guys are all still hanging out here. So cool.
Feel free. I mean, if you have a question, if anything else you want to think.
I'm gonna let my dog in. She's really cute.
Okay. Thanks, Cordo. Glad it was useful for you. My dogs are still locked up. There we go. There's the puppy.
There we go.
My dog's
coworker.
Okay.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks, everybody.